You know, in the movie Salvador, when the James Woods character is trying to escape El Salvador and he fakes his cedula and the evil border guard sees it and he goes, "It's fake." And James Woods, in the performance of a lifetime, kind of pauses for a second and he goes, "Okay, it was a rush job." That's how I feel about this film. This film is a bit of a rush job, but I wanted to get it out because my schedule is getting pretty crazy. This is the first in a whole new series of films that are going to fall under my bike life category on this site. And I know for those of you who come here for photography, you're probably not thrilled to hear that, but don't worry, the photography stuff's not going away. The bike stuff is just going to be an addition. Cycling is a big part of my life, but I'm not that guy. You know, I'm not a professional cyclist. I'm not a particularly strong rider. I'm not an expert on cycling. I don't know anything about cycling mechanics. I can't work on my own bike, none of that stuff. But because of those reasons, I think I am incredibly representative of a pretty sizable portion of the country. The cycling infrastructure protocol apparatus in America, to me, is beyond maddening that we are so far behind other regions of the world. I think a lot of it is based on ignorance and misinformation and fear, but I also think a lot of our cycling infrastructure is based on legitimate issues that we have here, whether that be distance or safety, insurance, the expense of insurance, the expense of integrating cycling infrastructure. But it's something that I am wildly interested in, and that is my long-term play in life, is to try to get more American butts on bikes over time. And again, I think I'm a good representation of someone who loves cycling but is not a cycling expert. In fact, I am far from it, which you'll probably know very clearly by the end of this film. But this film is called, what's it called? From Salsa with Love. Yes, that's a nod to the old James Bond movie. Get over it. I'm not the first one to rip that off. But I need to tell you a little story here before I tell you what bike is going to be under me from now on. And I'm telling you, it is the single best bike I have ever seen in my life. It is so much further and better and beyond what I thought I was going to get that I'm kind of beside myself. In fact, I was on the list to buy a Canyon Grizzle that I've been waiting for months. But after doing exactly one ride on this new Salsa, I am not going to buy the Canyon. I feel bad for manufacturers right now because supply is very limited, transport expense, raw materials incredibly high. That Canyon bike has been on a wait list forever and it keeps getting postponed and postponed. I looked at Cannondale bikes, 0 in stock, Specialized 0, Trek 0. A lot of the brands are hurting. I looked at an e-bike for my wife a couple of days ago. It was a 2020 model that hadn't sold. They would not budge on the price, which is crazy because you can't even get a second battery for that bike and they still wouldn't budge on the price. So the cycling industry is it's still hurting. And so for what Salsa did in this case is so far above and beyond, I wanted to make a specific film about it. So let's go back to 2013. 2013, I was living in SoCal. I was healthy and I had a sort of road bike and I had it was a road kind of touring bike, and then I had a mountain bike that someone had given me, a Santa Cruz full suspension. My buddy had gone over the handlebars, broke his elbow. He said, "I'm never gonna touch a bicycle again," gave me this full suspension bike. I'm not really a mountain biker, so I had these two bikes. And my idea was get rid of these two bikes, get one Swiss Army bike that does everything. And every single person said to me, "Don't do that. Do not buy that. That bike doesn't exist. You're going to compromise all across the board." And I just kept thinking that I know that's not true. I know there's something out there. And when I saw the Salsa Fargo the first time, I was like, that's the bike. That is the jack of all trades bike. I can use that for everything. Then I found out there was a Ti version, a titanium version. I had never had a Ti bike, but I'd heard about Ti bikes forever, and I was just enthralled. I wanted something that didn't rust, that was potentially a bike that would last forever. And it was a little more expensive, but at the time you could buy the complete Salsa Fargo Ti, and it was a complete bike, and it was so much less expensive than any of the other Ti brands that I looked at, like Seven and Moots, who make insanely good bikes, but very, very pricey. And I was like, I'm not spending more than $3,000 on a bicycle. Even though I'm going to use this every single day, I just don't want to go over that barrier, because again, if someone comes to me and says, "Hey, tell me about cycling," and I tell them, "Hey, I'm sitting on this whatever really expensive bike," that can be a turnoff to some folks. So even though the bike that I'm sitting on now is quite expensive, there are less expensive versions of the exact same bike. But I'll tell you exactly what I built and why. And I kind of backed into making a bike that is definitely the best bike I've ever had. So I buy this thing in 2013 and then promptly get Lyme disease. And so I'm waiting for this bike to come in as I'm getting sicker and sicker and sicker. And then I get to the point where I know I am completely hosed. I'm on a bike ride. I'm sick. I'm really sick, both physically and cognitively sick. I'm on a bike ride with like 5 other people and don't know I'm on a bike ride. I don't know how I got there. I sort of came to on the bike looking down at the wheel next to me and saying to myself, hey, that's someone else. And then looking down at my own bike and saying, I'm on a bike ride. Like, how did I get here? Where am I? Who am I riding with? That's how cognitively sick Lyme disease had made me, not to mention physically. That was probably no more than a 10-mile ride, and it would make me crash for 2 or 3 days after. This was before I got diagnosed. I didn't know what I had. So the Salsa arrives, and I can't ride it. So it sits for almost a year in the library in my house, and I would sit in a chair reading, looking up at the bike, saying, I can't wait for the time if I ever get healthy enough to ride this bike. So a couple of years in, you know, I'm healthy enough to ride, but not really strong, acutely sick for 2.5 years, partially sick for another 2.5 before I start to come out of it, before I become the stellar, healthy, incredibly fit person in front of you right now. So anyway, that's the story of the bike. This original Salsa Fargo Ti I have, it's 2014 model, instantly becomes my all-time favorite bike. My second bike at the time, which I had gotten, I only purchased because I got such an incredible deal on it, a full carbon Bianchi D2 carbon cross bike that I converted into a road bike. I never touched it again. It just immediately got tossed aside. I, in fact, long-term loaned that to a friend of mine who I'm supposed to see later today, actually. Hopefully it hasn't been stolen. Bike theft, whole nother issue here. So that's how this whole thing came to be. The next 10 years goes by, and I ride the Salsa all the time. I ride it on single track, trail, improved trail, fire road, gravel road, pavement, tons of stuff. I change up the tires from 2.5-inch mountain bike tires to 40 road tires to touring tires. I've mixed it all up. I've tried everything. I have racks on the back. I've used this bike in every conceivable way. By far my all-time favorite bike. So 2 months ago, I'm riding here about 3 miles from the house, and all of a sudden on a pedal stroke, I feel this hitch. And I was like, oh, I blew the bottom bracket or something, or crushed a bearing or whatever. Again, I have no idea what I'm talking about. I'm just pulling that out of my ass. So I'm like, something's wrong, definitely wrong with the bike. So I stop and I'm looking at the bike. It looks fine. I look at the bottom bracket. It's fine. I thought, okay, maybe the rear hub went out. I grabbed the tire, and I grabbed the rear tire, and as I move it side to side, it moves about 6 inches. And I'm like, huh. I'm no bike expert, but something feels a bit wrong here. And that's when I saw the frame had snapped. And I was like, wow, I cannot believe this. So as an intelligent college graduate, I proceeded to ride it home. And at any second I thought, this thing's gonna blow apart like on a cattle guard or something. But no, I was like too lazy to walk home. So I rode it home, it totally made it. And I was like, God, this is crazy. So I was just getting ready to, you know, strip all the parts off of it and, you know, basically trash the frame. And my wife at the last second said, why don't you reach out to Salsa? And I was like, why would Salsa? I got 10 years out of this bike. This was the best bike I've ever had. I have no regrets. I'm not unhappy. I'm not upset. I feel thrilled that I got 10 years out of this bike. She goes, reach out to them. And I was like, you know what? That probably makes sense in some way, because maybe they want to see pictures of the brake. So I did. I reached out to Salsa and said, look, this thing broke, no hard feelings, love the bike. Do you want pictures of the brake? And they wrote back and said yes, and then also asked me like 3 or 4 questions about the bike. How many miles on it? What kind of riding do you do? Do you have a picture of the full bike? All that stuff. And I said, sure. So I sent the information back, and the guy wrote back and said, look, you're long out of warranty. And I said, absolutely, I totally get that. I'm not asking for anything. And he said, but we're gonna do a goodwill replacement. And I literally read the email and didn't know what that meant. And in my head, I was like, huh, it almost sounds like they're talking about replacing the frame, but there's no way they're gonna do that. Like, why would they do that? So I read it again, and then I just couldn't find any other workaround or solution to what other than that could it possibly mean. And I wrote them and said, is that actually what you meant? And he said, yes, we're gonna replace the frame and fork. And I was like absolutely blown away. So this thing is coming, and all of a sudden I'm like sweating and nervous, because this is like the modern version of my old Salsa Fargo Ti. This is the boost frame with the much wider rear triangle, all this stuff, which of course I know nothing about. Thank God for Bailey at Sincere Cycles in Santa Fe, because Bailey is like me. I'm fumbling around in the dark, feeling for parts, and he's like got a flashlight shining the way to the safety in the daylight, because without that guy, I would never have anything of what I have right now. So thankfully with him, you know, we worked to this. Salsa was sending the frame in, and I said, look, I really want to build this. I know that some of the old parts may work, but they're also 10 years old, and this might end up being my only bike. So I'd rather spend a little more money on good components now, rebuild it so that's sort of the prototype bike of the future. Think Arnold in T2. You know, he's evil, but at the same time, he's kind of cool and helping people out. That's kind of how to envision the bike. So reached out, got the bike, Goodwill replacement. Bailey at Sincere helped me out. Tie frame and fork. I thought it was just a frame. Then he says, no, dude, it's the frame and the fork. And I'm like, that's pretty incredible. So I made some decisions up front to spend more money and lower the weight. But the main decision I made, for I'm not entirely sure what reason, other than the fact that getting components is really hard, is I decided to turn this bike into a single speed. Now, Bailey is kind of a legendary dude in the single speed world, up from what I know of him. And so maybe that was the seed. He never said, turn this into a single speed. I was the one that said, I think I want to turn this into a single speed. And so I did. And not really considering all the ramifications of that, but after having done exactly one ride on this bike, I will tell you with certainty, it is a blast. The single, yes, there's a downside. It's slow on the downhills. You got your momentum and that's about it. And there's some out here where we live at 7,000 feet, there's some pretty steep areas where you're gonna do hike a bike. I have no problem with that. But the single speed is a blast. It is so simple. And basically you realize when you go to a single, you realize immediately how much you're shifting on a geared bike. It's just perpetual shifting and it's gone. My finger still twitches when I'm trying to shift, but it's great. So let me talk about this. Tie frame, fire starter, carbon fork on the front of this thing, which is riveted front and back. So I can put bottle cages on the back and anything, Salsa anything cages on the front, which I cannot wait to do because I'm definitely gonna take some trips on this bike. The old fork was just riveted on one side. This is a black fork, and the frame is the basically just the straight raw titanium look, which has been my all-time favorite tie look anyway. The 2013 bike was blue, white, and tie. I much prefer the look of the new bike. It is absolutely astounding, which I'll talk about in a minute. I had the old rims, which are aluminum, and I almost kept them. And then I was like, you know what? And Bailey said to me, he said, look, the weight of the wheels and the momentum, and he described it in some technical term I can't resurrect right now. But he's like, it's the single most important part of like forward momentum on a bike. And he was like, think about carbon rims. And I was like, let's do carbon rims. So I did whiskey carbon rims on this bike. They are insane. They're beautiful. Everything on the bike is beautiful enough to get people who do not ride, have no interest in cycling. Two of my friends came over, saw the bike unsolicited. I never said anything. And they looked at it and said, oh my God, that is a beautiful bicycle. So that's what it is. The whiskey carbon rims, single speed. I went with SRAM, I think they're EXO carbon cranks. Had a choice of getting aluminum or carbon. And again, because I was going single, I was like, I'm gonna maximize the weight savings and go as light as I can. So I did the SRAM cranks. Getting Shimano components was incredibly difficult, and I found like one set of these cranks out there. They are gorgeous, fantastic. Also changed out the seat post. I had the original Thud Buster, which really wasn't working anymore, and it was pretty darn heavy. So I tried to get a tie seat post. I couldn't get one anywhere except the cheapest one I could find was like 300 bucks. I went with the whiskey carbon post. It's gorgeous, and of course, more importantly, it matches with the rims, which, by the way, don't be a schnook. It's not how you feel, it's how you look. So that's how I went with that. I kept my Redshift suspension stem and my Redshift kitchen sink handlebars, which I absolutely love. The suspension stem is not like this. I mean, you really have to hit something pretty hard to get the full benefit. So it doesn't, even when you're climbing and standing on the bars, you don't feel the bars sagging. I love the way it works. It's just enough to take the hard edges out of a lot of the things that we have around here. And the kitchen sink handlebars are absolutely fantastic. I rode that original Salsa for 10 years with the original wood chipper bars. And because I'm such a massive, fit, sculpted human being, you know, my shoulders are actually pretty wide. And I didn't realize how narrow those bars until I put the Redshift, the kitchen sink bars on. And it is like, I feel like I got opened up a little bit. And plus, They're so comfortable in so many different positions, and I love their bar tape as well. They have this special bar tape they use, which it's kind of dreamy. In fact, I sometimes daydream about it when I'm alone, but try to keep that between us. Kept the old MTB saddle. Went with my Crank Brothers pedals, which are clips on one side, flats on the other, because this bike is going to be used all the time for everything. I'm going to be in civvy clothes and shoes at some point. And the last decision I made, which was huge, was to go tubeless. I've been running tubes forever, but we have so many thorns of various size and shape out here that I was just having, if I wasn't running the Schwalbe Tour tires, the Marathon Plus Tours, they weigh more than this entire bike. If I wasn't running the Schwalbe tires, I was flatting nonstop with tubes. In some cases, flatting 5, 6, 7 times on a single ride. So going tubeless, I saved an absolute boatload of weight because somehow, and I think Continental sent me tires a couple of years ago. I think I did a thing about the Schwalbe tires, and a marketing manager for Conti reached out and said, hey, can we send you these tires and have, try these out? And so they sent these Continental Race Kings with black chili compound. I live in New Mexico. How can I not run a tire that has chili in the name? And they are a fraction of the weight of the Schwalbe Tour tires. That makes perfect sense. Tour tires are built for one specific thing. They're not built for speed, they're built for durability. Whereas these tires, tubeless, are so light and they are so responsive. Plus, I'm running a much fatter tire than I've ever run. And I don't feel like I'm really sacrificing anything because the weight of the bike is astoundingly light. I could not believe it. I didn't even think about the weight until I picked it up to put it in the van to drive home. And I just picked it up and went, oh my God, this is fantastic. The one thing I don't have that I need is a rear rack. And they make an alternator rack for it. I don't have it because the old rack that I have, the alternator, fit the old rear triangle of the old Fargo Ti. The new one is Boost, and so it's much wider than the old one, and so I need the new version of the alternator rack. Not a big deal, it's not a super expensive thing, but I need it because I got panniers, and this is gonna be the jack of all trades, be all, end all, do all bike. And that means commuting, that means grocery shopping, that means bike packing, that means riding for training, all of the above. I don't know how the single speed is gonna work out with fully loaded panniers on the back. That's where I'm gonna definitely be doing some hike-a-bike, just getting into town. So for me to go to town and back from here, it's about 20-mile round trip. It's a great ride. It's super easy when the bike is light, but loaded, it's gonna be a little tricky. But that's the end. That's the end of our story right now. That touring into town and back is gonna lead me into the next film, which is about monetary strategy when it comes to using a bike, integrating a bike into your week, and whether that's 1 trip, 2 trips, 3 trips, sacrificing a trip in the van for a trip on the bike. And this will be a combination of the financial savings of using the bike offset by the extra time required to use the bike. And if I'm charging myself per hour and it takes me an extra hour to do that trip, then I've got to cut into the financial savings based on paying myself time. For me, the single best, most important strategic way of getting Americans on bikes is to prove to them that it saves money. I think money talks in America. That's the primary driving force. And when you start to realize how quickly it adds up, for example, 1 trip into town, 20 miles, charging myself 50 cents a mile back for using a bike and not using the van, so there's no gas, there's no tires, there's no maintenance, there's no depreciation, no insurance. That money adds up really quickly. And if I set that money aside, what can I do with a micro investment plan with that money to do something interesting and creative? That's what my next film is going to be. But there'll be some action sequences on the next film, not all this boring me crap sitting on camera. But I just wanted to say absolute all cap thank you to Salsa, because I still can't believe I have this bike. I mean, I have it. My wife walks by it and I catch her just like staring at it. I think I've already sold this bike once already, because someone looked at it and said, I want that exact thing. And I was like, well, it's pretty pricey. I said, and they're not like a super strong rider that rides every day. I said, you can get a steel Fargo and do the exact same thing. Steel Fargo, go carbon on everything else, build it up from the ground exactly like I have, but you could do a steel frame. And they just looked at me like, you complete moron. What are you talking about? They're like, I don't want a steel frame. I want that. So it's good. It's sexy. My goal now, a singular goal, try not to get the bike stolen. And bike theft is so rampant. I think I need a spotter. If I'm gonna leave this at the grocery store, I need a spotter. I need a civilian someone that comes up and I'm like, dude, spot me while I go in and buy whatever, ho-hos, and then get out of here because these bikes disappear so fast. That's another whole entire story that we have to talk about at some point. Thank you to Salsa. And thanks for watching this film. And if you are into the cycling, and I know the guys out there who watch my channel, this should be really fun. The future should be fun. And again, don't worry, photo geeks. I'm not going anywhere. We can talk about box speed and fluoride elements and all that crap that, you know, soft releases and straps and everything else. I'll be back.